Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Sin and Tonic. Today's story is that of Miss Jin and Miss Song. Let's go. Sin and Tonic! Ooh, up the shed without my phone charger and my battery is low and my notes are on my phone. Hello, I just quickly need to share with you what I am drinking because it's yum. So before we get going, it is... I can't pronounce that in a million years. It's a famous, I think it's famous brand, but it's a lemon. And it's lush. This is the tonic. Can you see? Can you see? It is a delight. Today's story takes place in, there are so many different places in this. It is like... It's a mega one, actually. Yeah, we go all over the place. Let's start at the beginning. So, in October of 2000, we are currently in Yorkshire tea. We're Yorkshire. They say that a lot up there. At football matches, probably more so. They don't just walk around doing that, but yeah, they're very proud. Very friendly people. Sadly, the police force there would have to deal with something quite horrific because one morning a passerby, always a passerby, I bet they had a dog, find a suitcase, a suspicious bag, if you will, literally in sort of undergrowthy, like when they're walking, next to a country lane just outside of York. They try and move the suitcase. I'm not sure why. That is braver than me because they noticed that there was a really manky smell when they were near the suitcase. So they wander along, probably saw it and thought, oh, look at that, someone's dumped a suitcase. And then as they got near it, stinks. And then they tried to move it, I guess with the aim of then opening it. Whoa, never do that. No. They call the police and report it. And the police come along to the site and they managed to move the suitcase from where it was, where it had sort of been dumped. They pull it out and they open the suitcase. Again, why? Just wait, because I reckon they know exactly what's going on there. I suppose someone's got to look. Pull it out, open it up. Immediately see a bit of leg and an eyeball. And then they close the suitcase and they wait for forensics to arrive because they have found a dead body. The outside of this suitcase had patches of blue paint, like some bits of blue paint on it. Other than that, it just seemed like a bog standard suitcase. Well, other than that and the body inside of it, Sophie, for goodness sake, you know what I mean. So a murder investigation begins and they search the surrounding fields and land. They then appealed to the locals in the area and somebody had seen suspicious activity in the lane, but this was like 2 weeks previously, 16 days. This local said he'd left for work at 4:10 in the morning, 4:10, and he had driven down this lane next to where this suitcase has been found. And it was unusual because somebody was in the lane. So first of all, that's early in the morning for other people to be about. But the car was stopped and a man was standing next to the car. The driver was out of the car, just sort of standing next to the car. And this local said it was just really suspicious. Based on the whiff from the suitcase, it would seem a pretty safe bet that this was likely the person that had dumped the suitcase because there had been quite a lot of decomposition. That word. Decomposition. Is that right? Oh my God. We'll go with that. You know what I mean. Decomp. So with that in mind, can you imagine that man that has obviously, I'm not feeling sorry for him here, but he's there dumping a body in a suitcase when matey boy, local, drives past. He must be standing there like, freeze, sweaty bum. Can you imagine? Probably didn't really think anyone would drive past at 4:10 in the morning. But oh yes, they did. The suitcase and the body were examined, like in the lab, and it was discovered in the autopsy that the body was a female. She was just in her bra and she had been bound, her hands had been bound with tape. And very bizarrely, her head had been bound in a very peculiar way. It was like a balaclava, tape that went across here. I'll demonstrate on my face because I'm not sure if I'll be able to find a picture of, I won't be able to share a picture of the victim, obviously, because that's gruesome. There probably isn't one that exists. But so the tape goes across here and it's thick tape. I'll share a picture of the tape though, because the tape was very distinctive and it's across the nose and across the head and round the head. So the only part of the head that was exposed were her eyes. So this mask, if you like, that had been created with this tape was the method of killing. The killer had wrapped this poor woman's head in this tape and suffocated her to death. It was a very sticky, adhesive, thick tape, and it had a design from Gilbert and George on it. Now, this was interesting because there was only 850 rolls of that tape. This is like CSI, guys. Oh, with that in mind, I'm going to pay for Paramount Plus, and I'll be able to watch the new CSI Vegas thing in the UK. Yeah, I'm very excited about that. Very. We've spoken about that before, and you know how much I love CSI Vegas. I love it so much. And I watched the trailer. Something just happened on my phone. Please don't, because I haven't got lots of battery. I watched the trailer and I was just like, yes. Anyhow, so only 850 rolls of this particular tape sold in the Tate galleries. I believe there's one in London, Cornwall, I want to say Manchester. And that is kind of like an amazing piece of evidence to have in such a case, because they can now trace these rolls of tape that have been sold, and only 850. That's not too crazy. However, they only managed to track 630, because I imagine some people will have bought that tape with cash. I guess they could have looked at, but anyway, they only managed to track 630, which is still good going. And all of those people, think of how much manpower that was. They traced those numbers of tapes, and then they had to find each person and had to rule them out as a suspect. Like, wow, that is a big chunky bit of work. They also checked the database for missing people. So the DNA of the Jane Doe in the case did not match any missing people at the time. Then they used this, honestly, there was just so much like police and investigation work that went into this case. It's like, it really was like, this really does happen. Kind of like blew my mind a little bit. It's like, wow, yeah. They got in forensic anthropologists, say that quick. They determined that the victim was from Southeast Asia and that this person was 20 years old. They looked at the suitcase and they found that the suitcase was from South Korea. With all of this in mind, the police then put forward another appeal to say, is anybody missing a 20-year-old woman from Southeast Asia, likely South Korea? And this was sent out into the public. After this appeal to the public, a South Korean man called the incident line. He was studying criminology, and he was actually a police officer from South Korea. He'd come here to study criminology. He informed detectives that there is a website in South Korea which is quite commonly used if people are missing loved ones. So if this woman is from South Korea, it's likely that her family, if they are missing her, if that's what's gone on here, that they will have posted on this website. So the UK police go onto this website and they look for a 20-year-old that was in London at that time, and they found a match. There was a missing woman called Miss Jin. Her brother had posted on this site to say that he was very concerned about his sister, that she was studying in France, but on certain dates she had travelled to sightsee in London in the UK. But that after this, he never heard from her, she hadn't spoken to her family, and she had just disappeared. So they were concerned. The only thing that didn't quite match with Miss Jin was that her bank card had been used in France after this Jane Doe in the suitcase had been killed. Here we go with the first sort of travel, because the police in Yorkshire, send a team to South Korea. And they go out there to speak to Miss Jin's brother and her family. Get the down low. They also sent a cheeky task force to France, Lyon, to go out and speak to Miss Jin's fellow students and see what's going on there. Were there any police left in Yorkshire? South Korea take fingerprints, I do believe, of like everyone, and they sent Miss Jin's fingerprints to the police in the UK, and these fingerprints were a match to the body that was found in the suitcase. So this Jane Doe is Miss Jin. The story that had been given from her brother and her friends at uni in France, that was that she was visiting London. So she was not meant to be anywhere near Yorkshire. So then another little road trip. So Yorkshire police have to now come down to London because this is where they believe that she met her demise and that her body had just been dumped in Yorkshire. The police reached out to the South Korean community in London. They wanted to know if anyone had seen Miss Jin and if anybody had any information. Turns out that Miss Jin had arrived in London on the 22nd of October, and in order to feel safe, makes me feel sick, just saying it, she had arranged her accommodation through a certain website that was with South Korean fellows, South Korean people. And she had booked her accommodation through that website and from a South Korean man, or through a South Korean man that was living in London. As this was all going on, the police then find out that there is another young South Korean woman missing in London. And what do you know? She had too used this same website and she had booked her accommodation. She was visiting for tourism in London, nice thing to do. It angers me. She's come here to do some touristy stuff, the same as Miss Jin. This woman is called Miss Song, and she has booked her accommodation through the same man that Miss Jin had booked through. This man is called Mr. Kim. Mr. Kim, he had moved to the UK. I believe I've got my dates wrong. He moved to the UK in 2000. My apologies. Miss Song and Miss Jin went missing in 2001. I think I said the wrong date just now. Sorry. He had moved to the UK after basically being disgraced because he and his wife got a divorce, and that's like unheard of in South Korea, like bad news. Mr. Kim is an illegal immigrant, and he is also, and I couldn't find enough information about this because I don't get it, but I have a suspicion about it. So he comes over as an illegal immigrant. He ends up having two properties. And when I say have, I think the whole thing, because it was all illegal. So he can't possibly have owned property. He must have been letting property and then subletting that property to these students for them to come and stay here and do their sightseeing. So I think that's how it worked, because how on earth would an illegal immigrant buy property? Am I being very naive? But I don't think I am. I think it was one of those things where he was sublet a property, probably illegally. Well, definitely, because he didn't have paperwork and stuff to be here. And then he sublet that illegally, but he had two properties. I'm going to say had because they belonged to him in some fashion, somehow. Illegally, he has them. One property was a flat in Eagle Street in London, and the other one was in Augusta Street. But Mr. Kim is nowhere to be found. He's disappeared. And at this point, the police wonder whether he himself might be a victim. I panicked then and thought that I wasn't recording. Oh my gosh. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? Can you imagine? Can you imagine? Therefore, they begin searching his properties and they start with Eagle Street. What a name. When they enter that property, they find that one of the rooms, a bedroom, has recently been redecorated. Suspicious. And guess what colour it is painted? Can you take it? Blue. A sample of this paint is taken, compared to the sample of paint from the suitcase, and it is a match. So that suitcase has been in that room. When they moved furniture, there was blood on the skirting board and stuff like that behind a desk. They took a sample of that blood, and that was a match to Miss Jin. They opened a cupboard, like a built-in sort of small cupboard, and when they opened it, there was a very disgusting smell. And they swabbed for DNA in that cupboard, and they found that that DNA matched Miss Jin. So it was likely that she had been murdered in the blue room, I'm going to call it, and then placed in the cupboard, either in the suitcase or just her body was placed in there. The other people in the building were interviewed, and the last time they saw Miss Jin was the 26th of October. And the man that had seen the strange sort of incident where it was likely the suitcase had been dumped was on the 2nd of November. So that gave a 5-day window, 26th to the 2nd of November. Mr. Kim's accommodation in Augusta Street was also searched, but this showed nothing. There was no forensic evidence of anybody being there or any murder taking place or anything like that. It was clean. They then searched one more property in London, and that was Mr. Kim's ex-girlfriend. And when they went to her property, they're looking around, and just bold as day, on a bookshelf or on some shelving units in her flat, was a roll of this Gilbert and George tape. What the? Likely that she had no idea that Mr. Kim had used it. And also now it becomes very apparent that Mr. Kim has something to do with the murder, almost definitely, of these two women. Well, Miss Jin. They then got some evidence off of that tape. There was some blood on the inside, ring, cardboard sort of bit of the tape. That blood was a match to Miss Jin. So that, it's linking it all together. They also found unknown DNA on that tape. They also found unknown DNA in and around the cupboard at Mr. Kim's other property. So they took that, and they're hoping that this is then a match to Mr. Kim. They also found car hire documents, and it was for a dark grey Peugeot car. The police go to the car hire company. Are you keeping up with this? Because I was just like, whoa. There's a lot to this case. They earned their money on this one, the old investigators, didn't they? They go to the car hire company. They find the car. Lo and behold, they are having an issue with this car, the company, because the boot stinks. They've had the car come back and it just reeked. So they've tried to, this must have been frustrating. They've tried to clean it. And no matter what they do, they cannot get rid of the smell. The police take the car, they swab the car, and they find Miss Jin's DNA in the boot. The police then start to look more into Mr. Kim, because it's becoming more and more obvious that he is the person responsible for Miss Jin's murder and for Miss Song's disappearance. And they look into his financials, and it turns out that he is £20,000 in debt. So he's got quite a lot of debt stacking up. And they also find, when they look in the financial records of Miss Jin and Miss Song, that their bank accounts have been cleared out. One transaction of Miss Jin's was on the 1st of November, and that would have been, she would have been deceased in the suitcase on the 1st of November. So how was her bank card used in France? Is that where Mr. Kim is? It turns out no. It turns out that Mr. Kim had actually asked another young South Korean woman to go to France. I mean, what sort of wizardry is this? He must have been charming or had a holdover or blackmailed this person. I doubt he paid her to do it, but she went to France and she used Miss Jin's bank card. He made up a story. He didn't say what had really happened. And this other South Korean woman just went to France and used the bank card, and he gave her the PIN. He had her PIN. And it is thought, and this is sad for me, I just find this like what a person. It's thought that he would have tortured Miss Jin for her password, So that the mask situation could have possibly been part of her torture before he then let her die. Imagine being tortured for your pin. Miss Song was reported missing on the 10th of December. Her bank card had been used after this to take out a large sum of money at an ATM in a certain place, and the police found it, and there was a tourist, what do you call it? Travel agent, right next door to this ATM. So they went in there and they, I guess that was just like a hunch, and they found that somebody named Mr. Kim had booked a flight to Canada. And so, no, I'm joking, they didn't send anyone to Canada, but they were then in contact with, I guess they were like informants, so people in the South Korean community, and they informed the police on the 17th of January that Mr. Kim was back in London and he was in an internet cafe. The police are like, there, quick, and they arrest him. Yes. He said, I have nothing to do with this, right? No, you're not pinning this on me. I went on my holidays to Canada, and the last I know, Miss Song was just over here being a tourist, and so was Miss Jin. In fact, he said he had driven Miss Jin to the airport. Yeah, the airport, and or the train station, and that she was making her way back to France. So that's what he knew. They obviously took his DNA. And this was a match to the tape and a match to the cupboard, the DNA they found in that cupboard. So he has not got a leg to stand on here, and he is charged with Miss Jin's murder. Of course, he maintains his innocence during all of this time. And then on the 15th of March in 2002, a plumber has to go to the flat in Augusta Street. And here he finds a swarm of blue bottle flies in the bathroom, and he calls the police. Now, the police have already searched Augusta Street flat and they found nothing. So it's only when these flies show up that anything is sort of like untoward. When they go there, they sort of realise that underneath the bathroom, downstairs, I think it's outside, like an outside cupboard way, I'll try and find a picture, is actually a cupboard, but it's been sort of disguised and hidden. So someone has boarded where there would be a door on this cupboard. It's like just been made to look like a wall. So they didn't notice that in their investigation, and it was also underneath the flat, and they've used like mastic, around it to seal it up. The police remove that, and that's when they are hit with the horrific smell. And underneath piles of clothes and a duvet, they find the body of Miss Song. She has the same taping around her head like a balaclava, so tightly that her eyes are protruding from her head. And this is the same Gilbert and George tape. Mr. Kim says, well, that's impossible, I was in Canada. But the science, and again, this is some CSI stuff going on here. The science of the blue bottles that they found at the flat pinpointed the day, very, very likely day, that Miss Singh was murdered and put in the cupboard, or when her body was placed in that cupboard. And he would have been in the country when that happened. They also found the mastic gun that had been used to seal this, to hide the cupboard, and Mr. Kim's fingerprint was on that gun. He maintained his innocence. However, when things went to court, he offered to plead guilty to manslaughter for Miss Song's murder. That's the murder that he just, out of both of these murders, that's the murder where it could be questionable about when she was placed in that cupboard. And you, near that date, were in Canada, so why would you plead? Anyway, the court were like, no, thanks. We are going to try you for murder in both cases. On the 23rd of March in 2003, Mr. Kim was found guilty of both murders, and he was sentenced to life in prison. And what just gets me so much with this one is that first of all, he only stole because the likely motive, they say, although I'm not sure, the method of killing is sadistic, like really, to me, it feels like he got gratification out of how he murdered the women, but they reckon that a lot of the motive was money because he was in debt, this debt that was mounting, but he only stole about £3,000 from both victims. Okay, so that just feels, I know any, like, murder is senseless, but it's just, really? And then also the thing that gets me so much with this case is that these two women had young women, like literally just women, they were so excited, and they had some freedom here, and they had chosen to book their accommodation in a way that they felt safe doing. It was all about safety. That's the reason that they used this site and that they booked their accommodation through Mr. Kim. And that is just really heartbreaking, because what an abuse of trust. Like, literally, that makes me angry and just so tragic. Also, I can't believe that I had not heard of this case. What do you guys think? There's been questions about whether, because he's been in other countries, I think, as well, and there's question marks over whether he has committed more murders. Either they don't think likely in the UK, because his MO was quite strong with the tape and stuff like that, but he could have moved on from another method. But they think that in the UK he only committed these 2 murders, but that he could have committed crimes else in other places. So they do I think they did look into that a bit. Yeah, it feels a very, what's that word I'm looking for? Sophisticated. Like, when serial killers, they progress in their killing and they adapt, and I don't want to say that they get better at it, but they progress, don't they? They move on. And it feels like he'd done that before. Like, it's so specific. I don't know, or had he just seen it somewhere? And to me, this was more than murder for money because of the way he killed these women. That's what I think. I think he got some gratification out of the method of how, it's vile. Oh, gotta shake it up, shake it up, grim. Anyhow, that is all I have for you on today's case. How are we all? I'm all right. I'm in the mood for a weekend. I don't think I've got anything interesting. Don't think I've got anything interesting to report. My sister sent me a cream tea in a box. Scones, jam, cream, a couple of biscuits, tea. Do you like tea bags? Did she know? Oh my God. And that was delightful, because I'm under it with my deadlines and stuff, like essay just every 3 weeks. It is relentless, and they're heavy and lots of words and lots of research. So yeah, she sent me a lovely cream tea in a box, and that was just so nice. And Paul was home for lunch as well that day, so he had cream tea with me. A very lucky boy. You probably don't have cream teas in America. I know lots of you are in the USA. Do you have cream teas? I think a scone is similar but not the same as what you call a biscuit. They look similar, but I don't know. And you have gravy. Your biscuits seem to be more savoury things, like a scone-like bun for stuff, or with gravy. Whereas a scone here, because I don't think your biscuits are sweet, are they? Whereas maybe they just look similar and they're nothing alike other than that. But a scone is, if you have had both, let me know. I'm interested to know. But yeah, they look similar. I think a scone's a bit more hefty and heavy, maybe. I might be wrong. I'm going to love you and leave you. Have a wonderful weekend. And I will see you next week for another true crime story. And a glass or a tumbler or a bucket or a cuppet or a mug or a jug of gin. Love you very much. Bye.